Well, first of all, I should introduce myself. I'm John Volk from Brachy Consulting, and I'm going to share results of a major study that we worked on in the last several weeks. You can't pick up a veterinary journal these days or go to a conference without hearing about some of the mental health and compassion fatigue and burnout issues, excuse me, that the profession is facing. And yet, as of a year or so ago, there was really no definitive information as to how prevalent some of these situations were. So we set out to rectify that. And Brachy Consulting collaborated with the American Veterinary Medical Association and Merck Animal Health to conduct a major study called the Merck Animal Health Veterinary Wellbeing Study. And I could spend all of my Hot Rocks time just talking about the methodology, but this was a very large study. That was a sample we pulled from the AVMA. They worked with us. We got a very high response rate, almost 18%. And then the sample was weighted to the AVMA membership. So we've tested non-response bias. So this is absolutely representative of the veterinary community, both practitioners and non-practitioners. And the goals of the study were to definitively quantify the prevalence of mental illness in the veterinary profession, to measure the level of well-being among veterinarians, and I'll talk about a little bit more about what well-being really is. And then we actually benchmarked veterinarians to the general population. So we were able to compare veterinarians to similar data from the general population. And this is really important stuff. At the beginning of the survey, we asked veterinarians, what do you consider the most critically important issues facing the profession? And we had a long list, and they included business issues and personal issues and financial issues and so forth. Here's what they told us. These are just the top 4. The number one concern that they said was critically important to the profession was high student debt levels. Second was stress levels of veterinarians and suicide rate among veterinarians. So that tells us how important veterinarians consider mental health issues in the profession. And so in this study, we used 2 key measures. One was a measure of serious psychological distress or mental illness, and that was measured using tool that is used in psychology that's been widely proven. It's called the Kessler-6, and it's a battery of questions that measures a person's mental health. And then we measured well-being. Well-being is really a well-established concept in psychology. It's different than wellness. Wellness often usually is focused on physical health. Well-being is on mental health, and what well-being measures is the way individuals think of their life compared to what they would consider their best possible life or their worst possible life. So it's really through a battery of questions, they put themselves on a 10-point ladder from 0 being the very worst that they can imagine to 10 being the very best. And then we had a whole basket of things that could be influencing veterinarians' well-being or mental health, and we tested all of those issues in the study. And again, I'm just going to give you a glimpse of this, and at the end of this, I'll give you a website where you can get a lot more information. But the key findings were that mental illness among veterinarians occurs at about the same rate of prevalence as in the general population. So there was a study published in JABMA a couple of years ago called the NET study. Randall Nett from the CDC was the lead author, and that they estimated there that mental health was about 9%, but that was not a representative study. Had a lot of respondents, but it was an opt-in study, so people could go to websites and answer, so there was no way to tell if it was representative. So mental illness is occurring in the veterinary profession at about the same rate that it appears in the general population. Overall, well-being is lower than in the general population, but the devil is in the details here, because among older veterinarians, those that are older than 45, they actually score much higher in well-being than the general population, much higher. It's the younger veterinarians, those under 45, that have much lower levels of well-being. And what we've seen throughout this survey is that it's young veterinarians that are really at risk for low well-being and poor mental health. So one of the things that this study demonstrated is that veterinary medicine is an extremely stressful profession. We measured the incidence of several forms of stress, and 2/3, now this is only practicing veterinarians. Practicing veterinarians in general score lower in mental health and well-being than non-practicing veterinarians. That is, those people that are in industry, academia, and so forth. But fully 2/3 of practicing veterinarians in the past year have had a serious episode of depression, anxiety, compassion fatigue, burnout, excessive use of alcohol, or use of recreational drugs. So, that's 2/3. But among younger veterinarians, associate veterinarians, it's 80%, 79 to be exact. Excuse me, hydrating here. But stress is extremely prevalent. And to the degree that veterinarians as a group have soured on the profession, only 41% of veterinarians said that they would recommend the profession to a friend or family member. Now, we didn't find data for the general population, so we actually asked similar questions of the employed general population in an omnibus study, and there for employed Americans in jobs that require a college education or more, so roughly equivalent, 70% would recommend their career to a friend or family member. And interestingly, for younger people in the general population, it's even higher. It's 80%, 85%. But among veterinarians, among younger veterinarians, it's even lower. It's down in the 30% range. So very scary. Now, we did find data of similar questions asked of physicians, and there it was 51%. In the physician survey, there was no don't know or not sure. But this is alarming to organized veterinary medicine. So among those who would not recommend the profession, we asked them why not. And there's two really key issues here, financial stress and work-life balance issues. So compensation-related, student debt, first the two top ones, and then the personal toll veterinary medicine takes on a person, and work-life balance related. Those are the other ones. And this was the only open-ended question in the survey. So we were able to summarize the gist of their responses. So what are we going to do about it? Well, I'll just touch on a few things today, and we're really working more and more on this. But one is that as a profession, we really need to recognize and acknowledge the fact that this is a stressful profession. The stress isn't going to go away, so we need to have better ways of coping with it, right? So we need to recognize it in the community and in our practices, and need to utilize counselors. Now, we've already had a couple of people talk about financial counseling. So because of these extraordinarily high student debt levels and relatively low salaries, and people who still want to buy practices, which we encourage, they really need professional help with their finances. So people really need to take advantage of certified financial planners to really manage their finances. We also need to take better care of using psychologists and social workers. Now, of the 5% of veterinarians that are suffering from mental illness, we found that only about half of those were receiving treatment. So we have about 2.5% of the veterinary population that's suffering from serious psychological distress or mental illness that is not seeking help. That's a dangerous situation. So people need to take advantage of it, and employers, practice owners, need to acknowledge in their work groups that this exists, and it probably exists in their own practice, no matter how well their practice is managed. And they need to encourage people who are feeling some of these stressors to talk to people, to find counselors, and then to say, we will give you time off work to do that. That's very, very important, because one of the things we found is that people don't want to ask for time off work because then they have to admit to their boss that they're having problems. They are having problems, folks. So employers need to say, you know, some of you we know are, be sure to get help, talk to a counselor, and we'll give you time off to do that. And there are a number of institutional resources that are available or that are being developed. Virtually every college of veterinary medicine now has psychologists or social workers to work with their students and faculty. And most of these universities, if not all, are now telling their alumni and veterinarians in their communities, if you want to take advantage of these resources, feel free to call them. One of the experts we worked with on this study, and we had a whole team, was Dr. Elizabeth Strand at the University of Tennessee. She's really one of the pioneers of social work and counseling at the College of Veterinary Medicine level. And so she's really a pioneer in encouraging the university to reach out to non-students and faculty members. And then organizational, the AVMA, AHA, VIN scored pretty high, and many of the publishers like UBM also have resources available on their websites. And then each individual needs to take some responsibility for dealing with stress. Self-care is really important, and some of the things that showed up as being very successful at stress relief were spending time with family, socializing with friends, traveling for pleasure, and reading for pleasure. And we had a lot of conversation about why those last two things are on there. And we think our belief is that those are things that really take your mind off work. You know, if you go on a trip, whether it's to the Grand Canyon or to Scandinavia, I mean, it takes your mind off work. You have to have that to deal with stress, okay? And then there is a negative association between heavy use of social media and mental illness and stress. So if you have a Facebook habit, break it. Take a sabbatical. For people who spend 2 hours a day or more on social media, they are the most likely to have mental illness. And why is it that social media has that characteristic? So if you spend a half hour a day catching up with your family, great. If you're spending a couple hours a day, that's escapism. And what you're hearing is all the good things happening to all your friends and family members, and guess what? Your life sucks, at least as you see it, right? And so it really adds to the stress. It really does. And then as a group, we need to support positive behaviors. So we need to encourage people to leave work on time, to take their days off, to not come in and spend those extra 3 or 4 hours, because guess what? It's not healthy. It's not healthy.